That was wild. Washington pulls off a crazy comeback to beat Maryland 24-20.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights of this week's Moving the Game Forward, Mazda, Move and Be Moved. Just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you don't miss when we go live like this. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Lars, that was insane. That was wild. I was sitting here for the majority of that, just wanted to bash my own head in watching the first 3 quarters of that game. We're going to talk about all that sort of stuff at the end, because this needs to be positive. We need to give props to Ryan Walters, who did a tremendous job at the end of this game, changing some things up and holding Maryland to 52 total yards over their final 4 drives. But this doesn't happen without the offense. Shout out to Dezmen Williams, man. He had a tremendous day. What was your biggest takeaway from all this?
The resiliency of Dezmen in the offense. I think that's where we have to start, because going down 20-0, let's just first of all go down 13-0, and then you add in that third quarter where you get down 20-0. You think the game's pretty much over, because on the road, even against Maryland, who weren't world beaters but looked really good today. Again, shout out to Mike Locksley and Maryland. You got to get that out of the way as well, because you don't have a comeback if the other team on the other sideline is not very good. And I think hats off to them, but Washington is the better team, and I think at the end of the game that came true. But for me, it's about Dezmen showing that, hey, I'm going to be cool, calm, and collected as much as I can be. I was wrong, ended up throwing his first pick. I got to get that out of the way right away. But
let's get to the other one.
After that, you look at, what was the final score? 24-20?
Yeah. Hey, this is for you. You get that little applause. I don't know if it came through. It didn't come through my headphones for some reason. But go ahead.
But that was to me kind of where, when we talk about what is Dezmen, who is Dezmen, he proved it today with that comeback. Because
Absolutely.
If Dezmen's not a top 5 quarterback, top 3 quarterback in the conference, they don't win this game, flat out.
I agree. And that's one of the biggest things for me is, like, we saw so many different little things in the first half that were so maddening. It felt like Washington was just consistently trying to outsmart themselves, consistently trying to just say, oh, let's get cute. We can do this. We can do that. And none of it worked. None of it did. And that's one of the frustrating things that I know a lot of everydayers have had, questions about when it comes to Jedd Fisch. And I think all those things are completely fair. But you look at how this team came out of the locker room, how they adjusted. If you want to take out that drive at the end of the game with the clock running down, they scored on all 4 true possessions that they had in the second half. And that's props to Jedd Fisch. He made some adjustments. And even that first drive, it was really frustrating there for a while, where it was just slow and methodical. It was okay. You need to have a little bit of a sense of urgency there. And then you look at the drive following that. That was the explosive offense that we've been looking for Washington for a couple of weeks now. We didn't really see it against Ohio State, and we didn't see it at all for the first 3 quarters of this game. And there were a couple of, very obvious things that led to that, where I think Maximus McCree really did struggle today along the offensive line. And Zahir Mathis and Sidney Stewart, both tremendously talented pass rushers. Shout out to them. And both of those guys going down and going out for just any period of time did change this game. Obviously, Sidney Stewart was ejected with targeting, while Zahir Mathis looked like he rolled an ankle or something and was able to come back. And that did change some things as well. But Dezmen just really did seem to lock in there as the second half continued to roll on, where I saw some people who were saying it online, saying it in different places. I don't know if I completely agree with this, but it definitely seemed to play a factor. Was the shadows seemed to be messing with Washington's offense a little bit, that the stadium just seemed to be casting over the field. I don't know if I fully agree with that, but it's something that I certainly do need to throw out there as just one opinion that I've seen from some people, because as the game wore on, all of those high throws, they found the money. You saw it with that 34-yard touchdown to Dezmen Roebuck. He was able to find the money again there. And it's one of those things where we've seen this. I remember we saw this a couple of years ago from Michael Penix, where early on in the game it was, oh, that deep shot's not there. That deep shot's not there. And I was irate with that 4th and long go ball call to Denzel down the sideline. Like, why is that the call there? And you could even see it then, like it just wasn't fully dialed in. And as the game goes on, that play was so reminiscent of the one to Denzel a few weeks ago in Pullman in the first quarter that he just barely missed on. And it's just nice to see them continuing to dial those little things in, because you said it, Lars. Demond is a top 3, top 5 quarterback in this conference. And as he continues to dial in, and I think it's so important, I was talking about this with our good buddy Jake Butt a little bit earlier on in the week, he needs to be able to take bigger risks and make those throws down the field. And we saw him do that today. We saw him push the ball downfield. It's okay if it's not always there. Yeah, it's going to hurt your completion percentage a little bit, but at the same point, it can turn into big throws like that at the same point in time.
Yeah, it's about Demond when he's being protected and safe, and both being protected by Jedd and the offensive line. That's one thing where, you can have the little check down, dunk down, intermediate routes. But when we talk about getting chunk plays, we talk about taking a risk. Demond is the guy you can take risk with because he has the deep ball accuracy. He has the zip and velocity to get the ball there. And I think, he's got a little bit of Michael Penix in him where, you're just kind of trying to find the angle, trying to find the trajectory early. But by the way, when you get it and when that first throw with, let's say a 25, 30-yarder hits, now he's going to be money. And I think that to me is where Jedd has to continue to help Demond and honestly help himself. I think you kind of touched on it a little bit where Jedd still has those Jedd-isms, those Jedd woes. I don't even know what we should call it at this point, like Mad Libs for Jedd.
I like Jedd-isms.
Because, right, it works. When it works, don't break it. But when you think about what and who Jedd Fisch is, he's a very smart guy, very good play caller, been around a long time, both in the NFL and college. But he almost thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, and he might be. But the problem is when you act like that and when you call plays like that, you put yourself potentially in bad situations. And Washington really, to a degree, shouldn't have had to be in that position a couple of times in this game. But credit to Jedd and Demond for getting themselves out of it. And also, you got to throw in Jonah as well here because him getting another rushing touchdown and, that all 3 elements playing together, you don't have your full complement of weapons. That's fine. You're still the better team. And it took them a little longer than it should. Again, as I said on the preview show, not going to look as clean as it should, but you're still going to come out of here with a 24-20 win. And that's exactly what they did.
So it's one of those things where you look at, and this is going to be just kind of a long-winded point here, but you look at one of the things that really did seem to impact this team last year was the lack of an offensive line, the lack of a true downhill running game in just on the road in games like this, where that is something that can really help a team settle in, especially after a 4.5-hour flight, which is, going to be a theme here in the Big Ten as we continue to move forward. And in the first half, we just didn't see a lot of that just lowering the shoulder that we saw Jonah Coleman could do. I know he had to leave the game for a couple of plays there after he did so to the Maryland safety. And we saw him leave the game for a couple of plays there at the same time. And maybe you didn't have an opportunity to do that. And maybe Jedd was trying to play it safe, but as the game wore on, and I want to emphasize this again, as we saw Zahir Mathis get a little bit, or Zahir Mathis, get a little bit banged up. And we saw Sidney Stewart go out after that targeting call. It felt like this plan of attack changed, and I don't think it had to. I think that Washington had several opportunities earlier on in the game to try and establish a run and try to just move the ball downhill and just get 4 or 5 yards when Demond was out of rhythm, when there just wasn't a lot going right for this offense. And as the second half wore on, we saw some of those things come to fruition. I loved the screenplays. I think they might have been a little bit too frequent, but I loved seeing those screenplays because it's just a matter of getting the ball into Jonah's hands and letting him go to work. I thought he was going to walk in on that, the one down in the red zone on the screenplay. And we've seen that several times over the last few weeks now, is that when this offense needs a spark, it's not just handing the ball to Jonah. It's finding different ways to get him involved. We've seen him split out as a wide receiver now several different times and get motion back into the backfield and different things like that. But we've also seen him just really effectively use these screenplays. And it was unfortunate that John Mills went down. We want to talk about that a little bit later. But getting a guy like Paki Finau out in front on some of those with some of the athleticism that he brings to the table on the interior of the offensive line is really, really exciting because we just look at the way that these plays can develop. And if Carver Willis is, back here in the next couple of weeks, let's say, and John Mills gets back and, maybe we still see a little bit more Paki Finau, there are so many different ways to let a play like this work and just get Jonah Coleman more involved and continue to add what's already, an FBS leading 11 touchdowns for him this season. And Lars, the offense was tremendous, but if the defense doesn't really buckle down the second half, we really are not having this conversation right now. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Mazda. This episode is brought to you by Mazda's moving the game forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. This week's moment that moved the game forward was Dezmen Williams' 34-yard touchdown pass to Dezmen Roebuck to get the game to within 3 points early in the fourth quarter. That was a tremendous throw and catch. And it was just one of those moments where, there was a point in time that was like, okay, are they going to be able to do this? They haven't been able to move the ball much. And then to cap that drive off like that, boom, that was something that really moved the game forward. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. We've also got a message from our good friends over at DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Washington, it has to be Dezmen Williams. He delivered in a big way. That second half, he threw for 205 yards, plus a couple of touchdowns there, including one to Denzel Boston. And when the pressure was on, he came through. No hesitation, no delay. And if you've been watching week after week, this performance wasn't a fluke. Dezmen is on a streak. And just like Dezmen delivered for the Huskies, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. So as we just kind of turn our attention to the defense here, one thing that I wanted to go back and make sure I did some math on is Washington's defense after that touchdown drive where I know my dad was texting me. I had a whole bunch of people texting me, oh my God, it's over. This game is over. Right after just that was the response coming out of the locker room. For the next 4 drives, Washington's defense allowed 52 total yards. That includes a pair of 3 and outs. And, that the running into the kicker was a little bit scary when you want to just, talk about how that drive could have turned out. But Washington's defense, credit to Ryan Walters, man. It's something our good buddy Alex Katzen and I were texting about during the contest, where he said, they're playing this too much like it's Ohio State, where they're trying to keep everything in front of you. This is not the same level of skill talent on the outside. And it felt like Ryan Walters really did understand that and say, all right, we dare you to beat us. We dare you to beat us down the field. This is what we want you to do. And Malik Washington, credit to him, man. He looked really, really good in the first half and made consistent throws. He made a bunch of really nice throws, including that one to Octavian Smith on 3rd and 5 over the middle of the field. That was a tremendous throw that picked up like 29, 30 yards, whatever it was. But he adjusted. And it was nice to see them attacking screens and doing some different things instead of just saying, all right, we're going to sit back and just not let you beat us over the top. And as this defense continued to come downhill, you saw somebody like Leroy Bryant make a couple of really nice tackles in space. Jacob Manu had a really big impact on this game. And it was great to see because it took a little too long for those adjustments to come down. But the fact that we did see him was just, it's hats off to Ryan Walters.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we had talked about after the Ohio State game, where when you talk about that the 7-man pressure that Ohio State had the perfect call for, again, Mike Locksley is a very good coach, but he's not Ryan Day, and Julian Sayin is not, and Malik Washington is not Julian Sayin. And I think that was kind of the thing that we needed to see from Walters, where have a little bit of confidence in yourself. We know, by the way, he is very confident. He's a very confident person, not too braggadocious. He's not Jimmy Lake. Let's be very clear about that. He's not insane. But when you talk about a guy that knows where to, and I say that respectfully, just in terms of he's not going to get in his own way, where Jimmy ended up doing that. And I think today kind of proved that, because those last 3 drives, especially that we're talking about, that doesn't happen if Ryan doesn't understand the situation. I think that is what I want to hit home on, because you have the talent, you have the ability to be the team that can grab hold of this game if you want to, especially as the offense started to get going in the second half. And that is kind of where the script flipped, where if you take away, again, with Dylan Robinson and Leroy Bryant, like you mentioned, yeah, they haven't been great, certainly Leroy this season, but give them confidence. Be confident in yourself. Absolutely. And I think that's kind of what we saw, where if you don't have your full complement, that's okay. Where Jacob Manu, made the offset difference in terms of not having certain guys on the field. And I think, when you combine everything together, it's why not take a little bit of risk? Why not bet on yourself? And I think that's kind of how it all came to fruition, if we're being honest.
So I like where you're going with that. One thing I want to mention with Leroy is if we look back in a month, and let's say he really has turned the season around and gotten back on track, I feel like that drop ball on 3rd and long, which is a really well-placed throw from Malik Washington, is one of those plays that can just give a DB confidence and say, oh, okay, they're not completing every single pass that comes my way. And, he'll play with a little bit more aggressiveness. And that's something I'm really interested in. And one of the big things that I want to talk about is, I partially want to just throw a little bit of blame on Maryland for this by just saying, like, you could have done a little bit better. But Lars, after the first quarter, and I know this is something we talked about Colorado State a few weeks ago, after the first quarter, how many yards do you think Maryland rushed for in this game?
45.
After the first quarter?
Yeah.
16. They rushed for 16 yards after the first quarter, which is crazy considering it felt like they were doing a really good job moving the ball and just picking up 3, 4, or 5 yards. They rushed for about 40 in the first quarter. So, good thinking there. But it's one of those things where it felt like you could have continued to do that. And it's something you've talked about all week long is that they hadn't really been that effective running the ball, but it's also just a credit to Washington's defense. You were able to firm up a little bit in the middle, which is nice to see. And it's the one thing we've been looking for is you have so many experienced bodies, and the defensive line in terms of getting pressure was okay today. There were a couple of, nice pressures that forced an errant throw or two, but it wasn't as consistent as you would have liked it to be. And a lot of that was, okay, you're doing a good job stopping the run and you're forcing them into, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8. And when Maryland at one point in the first half was like 7 for 10, 7 for 11 at converting, it was really frustrating because, okay, now you need to find a way to get that pressure on the quarterback. But as the game wore on, and as we saw some differences in coverage on the back end, and you were a little bit more aggressive in that regard, you saw those changes come, and it was, okay, it is frustrating that Washington still isn't getting a whole bunch of pressure. But at the same point in time, what this defense was able to do was enough today. And that's fine. Where you look at it at the end of the day, allowing 20 points, it's really not that bad, especially considering what this offense had been doing. I would consider this, a lot of it is certainly based on the last quarter and a half, but I would certainly consider a lot of this a win for Ryan Walters and this Washington defense, because there are a lot of positives, especially considering you're without Zach Durfee, you're without Takario Davis, that you can take away from this and say, all right, moving forward, these are things we can build on.
Absolutely. And I think I'm glad you kind of touched on that, because when you don't have a guy that can set the edge like Zach Durfee, both against the run and the pass, and then you add to, again, we've known Buda was going to be out, but, having Jake Amani does offset that. But his impact, I think, was well in that same regard as well. You still have the depth. And I think that's important to note here where, yeah, we know that Washington doesn't have world beaters on the defensive line, but you have the better talent. And I think for me, when you look at where you're getting the pressure from, how it's coming to fruition, you don't have to get the sacks. You just have to find a way to get the opposing quarterback off structure, out of rhythm. Don't let them become confident. And I think in the first half, Malik Washington was confident as he could be. And I think that, first of all, to his credit, I was impressed. I wasn't necessarily as high on him.
He's a good player, man. He's a really good player.
I fully am. I'll buy stock in him any day and twice on Sunday. But you're still the better team right now because he's a freshman. And I think we also saw that come to fruition as well, where you have so much veteran experience on defense. There should be enough there to find a way, as Kalen DeBoer used to say, where you talk about, even Mikkel with that first half interception and all those type of things. There's enough to build on, and then you just have to hone it all together, which on those final 3 drives, Ryan Walters probably called the best game of his career, and certainly his time as a Husky, because that, if it doesn't happen, the way the season might head on could be completely different. And I think also worth noting, you're doing this on the road. It's one thing to do it at Husky Stadium.
Sure.
It's another thing to go 3 time zones across. I know 3 now. There we go. To do it in Maryland, in College Park. And you touched on a little bit with the shade. Again, the elements are going to be what the elements are. But getting out of your own way and not finding distractions or excuses, like, you have no excuse to not win this game, and they all put it together right when it mattered most.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's such a big thing, where in previous weeks with this defense, where you look at, Colorado State, UC Davis, not necessarily the biggest test. And then you look at the Wazoo game, you stepped up when it mattered, but it still wasn't good enough. And then you were okay against Ohio State. It certainly could have been a lot worse, but it also could have been a lot better. And this is a game where we saw the bad. We saw what it looked like early on, because Maryland had 2 16-play drives where it was very clear that, they weren't necessarily getting explosives and being really effective with what they were doing, but they were doing enough. And that was frustrating. That's maddening. Those 2 16-play drives each took up 8 minutes of game time. Maryland had the ball for almost 19 minutes in the first half. And it's maddening because that doesn't allow your offense to get in rhythm. And that led to just how the game played out the way that it did. And a lot of that was because it was just a little too conservative from what Ryan Walters was doing. And that's why I was emphasizing the screenplays in particular, because I know our good buddy Jake Butt said it on the broadcast, when you're sitting back and letting just those screenplays develop and pick up 6, 7, 8 yards, that's going to beat you 10 times out of 10. Like, it's just frustrating to watch that. And then seeing Jacob Manu and Leroy Bryant and Nephishitz Prysock and Dylan Robinson, whoever else, all come down and attack those plays and not let them get very far. It was great because, yeah, it is a bigger risk where if you're coming up and playing it like that and, you can make a guy miss, yeah, it does turn into a big play behind you. But at the same time, we've seen so many things from this Washington defense this year to say these defensive backs, especially on the outside, they are solid tacklers and you can trust them in space. And I think that was a really nice, just kind of switch up from Ryan Walters. And as the weeks go on, especially, you look ahead to Rutgers on a short week, I'm sure that's something that Greg Schiano and that coaching staff is going to look at and say, oh, hey, they've been sitting back a lot on these. Let's see how they want to play it with us and different things like that. So I'm really curious to see what that's going to look like. But Lars, that was one of the negatives. Let's get into some of the other ones because it certainly wasn't a perfect game for Washington. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. I love how the Peloton IQ system offers real-time strength coaching. It actually tracks your reps, suggests the right weights, and corrects your form, making every rep safer and smarter. The swivel screen is a game changer. You can go from running on the Tread Plus to strength training without missing a beat. And the personalized class recommendations keep you engaged. You get workouts tailored to your vibe and energy level each week. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. As we look at some of the negatives, it has to start with some of the play calling and with what Jedd Fisch was doing. There just weren't a lot of things early on, especially after that first drive, that felt like it was designed to get Demond Williams in rhythm. We talked a little bit about not necessarily getting Jonah Coleman as involved early on, and I'm sure him getting a little dinged up probably has something to do with that. But I want to just, I've got my little note card here, and I was like, what are the words that I wrote down in the first half? Slow, sluggish, out of sync. There was just so much from this offense today that we haven't seen over the first 3 weeks. And I don't know how much of that might have been, oh, hey, we overcorrected to this, and that against Ohio State because, they're Ohio State and they can afford to be a lot more aggressive because of the athletes they have to make plays on the defensive side of the ball. And it just felt like it took a little bit longer to correct. And as the game wore on, it was great to see some of those things adjust, but it doesn't necessarily make up for that fourth down go ball. I don't know why that's the call when you have so many opportunities, especially with a mobile quarterback, to try to get him outside the pocket and try to force Maryland to make decision and make plays in space and just see if Decker DeGraff, Dezmen Roebuck, who are both really, really solid today, can just get beyond the sticks for you and just turn it into an easy completion. And on top of that as well, the end of the first half management. You see Sidney Stewart go out for targeting, you have 10 seconds on the clock, and then that's the play call? Like, I don't get it. You had plenty of time to just dink and dunk something 10 to 15 yards, especially playing prevent defense the way that they were, and get out of bounds and at least try to put points on the board to send you into the half with some kind of momentum. I don't necessarily agree with it. Obviously, it all worked out in the end, so it's a little bit of a moot point, but this is one of those things where moving forward, I want to see, it's as Jedd Fisch said after the Ohio State game, you either win or you learn. And I think you can do both today because you won. You did a great job with that comeback late in the fourth quarter. Three possession comeback in the fourth quarter is certainly something that you can give a lot of flowers for. But you look at what got you into that situation, and it was all self-inflicted, all of it.
Which is good because that doesn't mean you have a ton of issues, but it means you have one glaring issue, and it's the guy that's calling the plays. And it's not, where Jedd's going to always call plays. First of all, let's just get that one out of the way right now. Anybody that wants to say, hey, why doesn't Jedd turn over play? Yeah, Jedd's going to roll over in his grave before that happens. So let's just be real about that. But it was, again, I guess I agree with you completely. I'll just play devil's advocate to say it was good at least to see Jedd make it right at the end of the game in the second half. But yeah, like when you play Maryland, you can afford maybe to have one of those two type of plays with the go ball, like you mentioned. But when you talk about the Penn States, the Ohio States, the Oregon game, like if you do that against Oregon, yeah, you could have lucked. Like, like that's the problem. And I think that's where I hate the phrase "you learn or you lose," like that type of thing, because you can do both. Like, and to me, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Where why do you keep making these self-inflicted issues? Now, yeah, you don't have your full complement of weapons, but that again. I can't wait to hear his answer on Monday, and I'm sure he'll, spin it about 10 different ways to Sunday. But there's no real excuse for it because there's so many other avenues that you can go where you talk about Decker, talk about even Rain Reinsbright or Desmond, Denzel. There's Denzel on a different route. Like there's so many weapons that you have, even Dezmen, and that to me is kind of why it's so maddening to where. This team's ceiling is so high. Maybe not necessarily per se this season, but I think we do think this is a 10-win team potentially at full health this season, certainly a 9-win team. But my word, there's sometimes where the play calling is a 10-win team, and there's sometimes where it's a 2-win team. And that's the problem, is that gap between 10 and 2 it's a really high and really low, where in reality it should be at an 8 more often than not and then try and get to a 9 and 10.
So it's not just that. There are so many other kinds of self-inflicted wounds. And one of the things that we were told was going to be better coming into the season was the discipline. 7 penalties for 64 yards today is just, quite frankly, not good enough. And a lot of them being pre-snap procedural errors on the offensive line is not good enough either, because then, you look at it and the personal foul on Jacob Manu, it's a little bit late. Obviously it is an unnecessary penalty there, where that's one thing where it's okay. You see why those things happen. And Jedd Fisch called that an effort play when he's talking about Alex McLaughlin's face mask that he got against Colorado State. And I'm sure he would chalk this one up to that too. But there are so many other examples of just drive killing penalties, especially on the offensive side of the ball. It's, oh, cool, big gain, or, oh, all right, you're in second and manageable. Oh, nope, false start. Oh, nope, holding call. Oh, another false start. Those are things that can't happen. And those are things that are, I don't know if it's just coaching, if it's making sure you're set, if it's being on the road, because we've seen this happen at home too. But those are things that you need to get squared away. And it's kind of past the point of, oh, this looks like it might be a flash in the pan. No, Jedd Fisch has coached 18 games now at Washington. This is something that we've seen just become a consistent trend, which is a little frustrating. But at the same point, it also feels somewhat easy to correct as you continue to move forward. However you need to do that, that's something that, you talk about, you can't do this against Oregon. You look at the schedule over the next couple of weeks, Rutgers is always going to be a well-coached team. Then you go to Michigan. Then you come home for Illinois. That is a really, really tough stretch right there. And those are going to be 3 very well-coached teams that you cannot make mistakes like that against. And as we saw today, you have the talent to cover up some issues, but certainly not all of them.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that is worth noting in that it's not like Jedd Fisch is a rising up and coming offensive coordinator who hasn't really been around that much. Been in the NFL, knows how to handle big business. And I think that to me is kind of why those false starts and procedural penalties are so weird, because it also happened at home against Ohio State. It's not just like this is the first time this season it happened. And I think to me, when we talk about Dezmen having control of the offense, I don't necessarily put it on Dezmen, but I wonder just, it's like what is missing with those pre-snap false starts and just, kind of alignment things, because I don't think it's on Dezmen. It's mostly on Jedd, but to me, it's just a confusing case of there's no real reason for it to happen, but yet it still continues to happen. And I think, well, you got to figure that one out quick because it's going to be an issue moving forward.
But this is why it's, it does fall on the coaching staff, because it's not just an issue we saw this season. It's something we saw last year as well. And last year, you have a little bit more of an opportunity to chalk that up to, oh, hey, this offensive line got together 6 weeks ago. So they're still really trying to figure a whole lot of these things out. You don't have that anymore, where this whole team has been talking about, oh, it's great that this whole unit has been together since January. There are so many different things that, like, oh yeah, the chemistry is better. This is better. That's better. But you're still committing these same penalties. And especially just in these situations where, like in a game like this, in this first half, when you know that things aren't going well, and then you just keep compounding on those mistakes, and you keep making the margin for error smaller and smaller and smaller. That's just straight up unacceptable at this point in time, especially where you say, oh yeah, this can be an 8, 9, 10 win team, because I absolutely agree with you there. And yeah, 8, 9, 10 wins teams certainly do make mistakes. But when you're coming into this game with the 4th most penalties in the Big Ten, averaging 5.5 per game, that's not good enough. When you're leaving this game with 7 penalties for 64 yards, that's not good enough. When Maryland committed 2, 3, I should have pulled that number up before I said that, but it certainly wasn't to the same extent that Washington was committing penalties. And again, as you look down the road, yeah, you got away with it in this game and you were able to survive, combined with some mistakes on the Maryland side, plus just really strong play in the final quarter. You're not going to be able to get away with that week in and week out.
You're not, but I do think it's a deserved result to get away with it this afternoon in College Park. I think, again, the better team won today, but the better team also did get tested. And I think that was important for all 3 phases in terms of, Grady getting a field goal, Jedd testing himself and the fan base, and pretty much everybody. Like Jedd testing everybody is probably
he tested my patience for sure.
Tried and true tradition at this point. It's a staple of Jedd Fisch, who he is. But again, it's those times where, you're never going to call the perfect game. You're never going to have the right call. Same thing with Ryan Walters, where you're not going to get it right all the time. But get it right when it matters will allow you to go into the next game thinking, okay, now we know how to get out of that situation. Let's avoid that situation in the first place. And you got to fix so many of these issues. But I think the procedural ones and the ones that are self-inflicted that you can correct pretty quickly are the ones that you're going to absolutely have to hone in on, because you mentioned that stretch coming up. It's not getting any easier. And I think this was a good one for Jedd too. By the way, shout out to Jedd. 2-0 on the road, finally, you lost every single game last season on the road. So again, good improvement. We're seeing marginal improvement, but my word, is it frustrating.
So I absolutely agree with you here. And one thing before we get out of here that I just want to make sure that we mention is this team is resilient. Man, like it really is night and day different from last year. And a lot of that is because we're starting to see more of the Jedd Fisch guys get in there. I want to dig myself for the coach speak there, but you look at just the differences on the roster, and it's very clear that this team just has a different kind of mental toughness about them than we saw at any point last year, especially as they got away from home. And we saw them, go down early at Iowa. We saw them, not be able to bounce back at Rutgers. We saw what happened against Washington State in the Apple Cup. I'm throwing some of those other games out because you ran into college football playoff teams on the road when you very clearly were not ready to compete with them. But there are so many different things that you can look at with this team and say you still were down 3 starters today in Carver Willis, Zach Durfee, and Tacario Davis. And the fact that outside of us bringing up their replacements for other reasons early on, the fact that this is the first time we're mentioning this, I think is a really positive thing. And I think that we saw some positives and negatives from their replacements, but it just showed that this team is not going to get down on themselves over what has been some really bad injury luck early in the year. And they've proven that they can be really resilient. And I look at this, short week against Rutgers and say, that's going to be really tough because this is the 3rd straight opponent that you're facing coming off a bye. But I look at who Washington has at the helm, and I'm not just talking about Jedd Fisch and Ryan Walters. I'm talking about Dezmen, talking about Jonah Coleman, Denzel Boston, Tacario Davis, and all of these other leaders on the team. And I think that they have done a really good job of helping boost this group and really buying into what this coaching staff is talking about, because it is a collaborative effort. When you call it a player-led program, it's stuff like that. It's, the coaching staff is going to give you their messages and give you all these things, but it's on you and on your peers to buy into what's going on. And I think that this game, and the second half in particular, showed that this team really is buying into all of that messaging, which is a really great sign for not just this season as it continues to move forward, but for what Jedd Fisch is building as well. And Lars, with that being said, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to all our everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate it. And if you like what we have to offer, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. Please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we go live like this. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And with that, we'll talk to you on Monday.